Ну что ж, всем здравствуйте. Я думаю, что мы уже будем начинать. Зовут меня Ренат. Я сегодня буду организатором спикеров, буду представлять всех спикеров, которые будут. Сейчас я вам оглашу наша маленькая, так сказать, адженда на сегодня, чем мы будем заниматься. В этом зале пройдет, я думаю, что все уже знают, поток перформанс. Также он подразумевает двойной формат. Первый — это доклады, которые будут длиться порядка 45 минут, и небольшие воркшопы, которые будут длиться порядка 2 часов. О всех перерывах и о большом обеденном перерыве я вам объявлю дополнительно. В конце каждого выступления каждый из вас по желанию сможет задать вопросы. Огромная просьба задавать вопросы именно в микрофон. У нас для этого будут присутствовать волонтеры. Если у вас есть вопросы, поднимайте руку, вам поднесут, и сможете нашим спикерам задать вопрос. Так, завтра у нас будет в этом зале проходить Out of the Box тема. И давайте, так сказать, поприветствуем нашего первого спикера, которого зовут Ник Диммер, который будет его доклада, тема доклада Load and Performance Testing in DevOps Area. То, что сейчас весьма популярно в Украине.
Good morning, guys and girls. Can you hear me? Yeah? Oh, okay. Yeah, I think now it's good. So good morning, guys. My name is Nachum or Nick. We are going to speak today about performance and a little bit load testing. You will have, I believe, like 5-10 minutes for questions. But if you feel you really must to ask, so go ahead, raise your hand. So yeah, let's start. A little bit about me. I'm actually speaking Russian, but they told me to speak English, so I hope, you know. I assume there are a few people who don't speak Russian here. Anyway, I'm kind of a strange beast. I was born in Georgia, but I have Ukrainian roots. I'm Israeli, and however, I live now in Poland. Yeah? So many things in one. Because of, you know, I used to live in different countries, so I speak 4 languages. Not Ukrainian yet, but I'm working on it. Basically, I spent my last 20 and since then, me and my team built numbers of systems. And for the last 10 years, I'm mostly in testing world, mostly in performance and automation. And basically today, one of my big passions is everything which has to do with performance. And I want to present today, we are going to talk about what is performance testing, what is load testing, and how all this connected to a new trends of DevOps, continuous testing and all this. So today we live in quite fast-pacing world, very dynamic. If like 10, 15, 20 years ago, we used to release a version once in a year, once in 2 years. Companies which released version once in a year, they consider to be a fast going. I mean, nowadays, if you release version once a year, then it's something wrong with you. Yeah, I mean, we release versions. Even large companies release versions, especially of web-based platforms every few months, every few weeks. So, the dynamics really has changed, so we are much fast going. And this basically implicates very dramatically the way how we test. Suddenly the manual testing became really a bottleneck. And you know, the performance and automation testing is really like, you know, it's on top, yeah. And part of it is because, you know, you really need to operate fast, so you need to find the better ways to do things. So this is automation testing, and the reason, you know, why performance and load testing is so popular is because basically a user experience is a new king now. You know, if we look back 10 or 20 years ago, then it all was about the functionality. You know, if I have more functionalities than you, then my product is better. Now it's all about user experience. You know, the functionality is not a problem anymore. Every kid can build a platform today. So it's more about, the competition is really more about, you know, what values I give you and what user experience I give you. Because, you know, the software nowadays is very emotional thing. You know, if it used to be very, you know, technical, today I think it's more emotional. You know, we are more attached to things we use. You know, it's starting with our phones. Yeah, I'm attached to my phone. I like, you know, you might like more, I don't know, Samsung, you might like Apple, but you are emotionally attached to brands. And also the same is in software. And so the user experience really became a king. So it's very, nowadays, it's very important, you know, one of derivatives of user experience is performance. So suddenly, you know, it's really on top. And performance does matter, actually, especially nowadays. This is, you know, a quick survey which did, actually they did in 2014. So I think now the numbers are even lower. So Akamai, I believe you heard, is one of biggest, you know, CDN or performance tools providers. So they ask people what are their expectations from, you know, from page load time, you know, how fast they want to see their website response. And, you know, more than almost 50% said we expect our page to be loaded in 2 seconds. Like, you know, when I started in performance field, like more than 12 years ago, we spoke about 8 seconds. You know, 8 seconds, it seemed, back then, it seemed to be like, you know, decent response time, yeah, 8 seconds. Today, it's like 2, yeah? So it's a huge difference. Implications of not meeting these goals is that you are losing customers. I mean, especially if you are B2C, you know, consumer-oriented platform. You know, business customers have a bit more patience, but consumers have no patience because there are so many alternatives there. So if you are e-commerce site and you don't deliver a smooth performance, then people just, you know, you lose just people, yeah? They just go away to your competitors. And pay attention that 30% actually expect it to be below a second, which even in nowadays, below a second is really like cool performance. You don't see it much, yeah? Especially in web. So things are really, you know, got mad in terms of, you know, the standards we expected to meet are really high. And so performance really matters. So it's not just about functionality, it's also about user experience and performance. Now, one more thing which happened is that, you know, it's absolutely mobile world nowadays, right? I mean, we do most of our things on our phones. So we more and more find ourselves doing stuff like we used to do over web, like buying stuff, right? We used to buy stuff in our like laptop, in our browsers. Now we buy a lot of our stuff over phone. So suddenly the shift is really toward mobile. And in mobile, we will talk about it more today. There are a number of different challenges which we didn't see in web applications. So mobile is really dominant, and we need to be aware of it, because performance and load testing is not just about web, it's also about mobile. Now, one thing, you know, I often got asked is, what's the difference between performance and load testing? I think it's quite a common question and a lot of confusion about it. And I think you will not find like one answer, yeah, like, you know, this is performance, this is load testing. So because we are going to speak about both of them, I want to kind of make my own definition, how I see performance and how I see load, so we guys can be all on the same page. You might not agree, okay, so just in sake of, you know, defining our decision today. So according to Wikipedia, right, So software performance testing is used to be to determine the speed and efficiency of computer network, software program or device, okay? While load testing is process of putting demand on a system or device, measuring its performance. So basically, what it means is that performance is about how, I would say it's about how device or software performs in a single user mode, okay? While load testing, it's about how system performs in multi-user mode, okay? Where there is certain, the way they're defined, certain demand or certain load on the system. I would say that also performance might include a load, because performance, I think it's a wider subject, okay? So it's part of performance and also creating a load. But for today's discussion, just to simplify it, when I say performance, I mean testing, you know, speed, user experience, response time in single user scenario, okay? And when I say load, I mean we create what they say create a demand. We create a multi-user scenario, we create a load on the system, okay? So let's start with load. So let's talk a little bit about load testing. So, you know, load testing, again, it's all about creating or simulating environment where many users use your application. So we won't speak much about, you know, devices or hardware testing. We will speak about mobile in terms of devices, but I'm not talking about hardware testing. I'm mostly talking today about software testing. So in software testing, load testing is all about creating the conditions to simulate what will happen, okay, if your application goes live, or you upgrade it, maybe it's already live, and a lot of users going to come and use your application. You know, I believe many of you have already experience in load testing. I want to talk a little bit about challenges, or like current challenges. One of the biggest challenges I see among many of our customers is, you know, it looks like trivial, but it's not. It's test environment. I think one of the biggest problems today in simulating the right load test is about putting the right environment to test against. Many companies don't put enough effort to get production-like environment. I mean, ideally when we load test, we want to load test against environment which is as close as possible to our production environment. Now, it's easy when we don't have anything yet in production, then we will need production environment anyway, so we set it up earlier and then we can test against it before we go live. The bigger challenge is when we already have a production environment, so we can shut it down for testing purposes, and we need to create another environment which ideally would be identical or very similar to production. Now, if you are a big system, your production environments, you know, they are heavy in terms of, you know, there are a lot of hardware and software and configuration integration involved. So it's not easy thing to create, and it's costly thing to create test environment. And what many organizations say is, okay, let's simulate something small. Let's put a server or two. So let's simulate a smaller you know, mirror of your production environment. Now, it's mostly coming from constraints of budget and time and so on. The problem with this is that most of times this environment don't really represent anything. So you test against this environment, and of course you can still find the basic performance problems. But you know, when we speak about applications which are already in production live for a few years or for some time, then usually you don't expect to find very basic performance problems. You mostly expect to find problems related to integration, you know, to the setup, to the scale. And then you can't really find these problems in very primitive and basic test environment. And so one of the biggest challenges, you know, to put the right environment, I will speak about in the next slide a bit about how to solve it, but we need to be aware that testing environment is super important. And this is why I put it in the first place. The second thing is discipline. You know, one of the biggest challenges I see organizations have with the load testing is how you put everybody on the same page. Okay? Load testing is usually something we do in very late stage before the release, and then everybody's so busy in, in preparing for the release, so nobody has really time for load testing, and nobody really pay attention for it. And usually in organizations there is no long-term view of how we performance or load test. So it's more like, spontaneous thing. And I think this is also one of the biggest problems, because when you come to load testing, suddenly you figure out that nobody is really dedicated for it. Especially we as performance testers, then we find ourselves alone, okay? And this is also one of the big challenges. Another challenge is the knowledge. Many times we have a limited knowledge of how our system works. I mean, in very deep technical details. And we don't have people who can help us with it, also because of lack of dedication, people are busy and so on. So I think in load testing, a deep technical knowledge is very important. And if you don't know your system on very deep technical level, so bring somebody who knows and work in pair. It's very important. Another thing which kills absolutely performance and load test is politics. Okay, and this is very common. Somehow, when you find a functional bug, okay, people expect to have functional bugs in application. Nobody says, oh my God, there is a bug, it's a crisis, right? I mean, it depends on level of bug, but generally finding a bug is normal. Like, people expect there will be bugs when we develop this system. But somehow people don't expect to have problems with performance in general. We load test, we find the system crashes, and then everybody, holding their heads and say, oh my God, we didn't expect it, yeah? And it's strange, I mean, I would expect, if you never tested your system in multi-user environment, why shouldn't there be performance problems? But organization in general don't expect it to be. And so once people don't expect it, and once the responsibilities are not well defined, then start to be a politics. Everybody start to blame, some another department, this is IT problem, this is developers problem, this is third-party provider problem, and so on. So, and then start to be a nasty game. So instead of fixing performance, many times, we just deal with politics. Define who is in charge, who to blame, and so on. And the last thing is tools. Even so load testing exists, I think at least probably one of the first tools was LoadRunner for the last probably 20 years. Still, if we look in how these tools evolved, they evolved quite slowly. I mean, the LoadRunner more or less looks the same, and the practical work is all very similar to what it used to be 20 years ago. There start to be some elements of, adding like automation tests to load. So like we create UI-based tests and we try to, simulate in multi-user environment, but it doesn't really scale. So, the core load testing is still very old-fashioned. And this is a problem because it takes a lot of time to prepare load tests. In most of, if you are a decent, application, then it takes time to prepare a load test for it because you work on very low protocol level, you work on HTTP level. So the tools are also create kind of bottleneck. Some suggestion to solve part of these problems. So first of all, I really suggest you and everybody, all stakeholders, you define a clear performance goals. This is something which rarely done. So most times, we come to performance or load testing towards the end of release cycle, and then, you ask people, okay, guys, what do you expect? Give me a goals. What's your, response time goal? What your critical criteria? And people don't know. They don't know their usage pattern. They don't know what to expect. And then you load test, but you don't really know what's good and what's bad. I mean, if system crashes, then it's simple, right? It's bad. But if it doesn't, and you get, say 8-second response time, then, is it good or is it bad? I guess if you are e-commerce platforms, then it's bad. If you generate some huge big data report, then 8 seconds sounds like good, right? It's not bad. So, it's a very tricky thing to answer the question, what is good and what's bad in performance. And I think the right thing to do is not to answer it by ourselves as performance engineers, but to let product owners to answer this question, because they really need to know what the business impact is and what users can expect. So one of really things I recommend is to define the performance goals. Then another thing I say, get everybody on board. Okay? Make sure product is involved, IT are involved, R&D are involved, system guys are involved. Make sure everybody is involved on early stages. Okay? So they can say, you know, we didn't know about it. Another thing which I have in the next slide is how to identify the right scenarios. One of the big problems in performance testing and load testing is that, you know, ideally, you know, product owners want to test everything. Okay? We want to test every possible scenario. But load testing is not about testing everything because, you know, it's heavy thing. You know, if you need to test everything, you will not manage to run any test. It takes time to prepare it. So you need to choose a small subset of scenarios which are most important. So I will talk about it in a minute. Another thing is no politics. As I said, politics kills any performance load test effort. So make sure the responsibilities are defined, because when politics start is usually when responsibilities are not clear. And then everybody trying to roll the ball in another's court. So make sure when you plan your test, define the responsibilities up front in very clear fashion. And the teamwork. When you run the test, make sure everybody is there for you. So make sure the IT is involved, like in real time. Okay, when I mean involved, it's not like, okay, call us. It means you run the test, and they're sitting there with you, or, you know, in some office, but they look at each one of stakeholders, look at their parts. Okay? So they monitor it, they are available, they look at the logs, and in every moment you can call one of them and say, hey, I want you to check this and check that, and he will respond instantly. Okay, so this is very important. Now about identifying the right scenarios, as I said, one of the biggest problems is that product owners and generally QA managers ideally want to test everything, right? Because we're coming from functional testing mindset, and functional testing, the coverage is everything. You know, we want to cover more as possible. Now in load testing, it's not really possible because it takes time, and you know, if you're going to cover everything, you will never run a proper test. So you need to choose a small subset. And what I recommend, how to choose it. So I divide it into two parts. First is a critical path. So identify what are absolutely critical scenarios for your business. You know, if this scenario is not working or it's slow, then your business is impacted. Okay? It's very simple in e-commerce. Yeah? In e-commerce, for example, one of critical paths is a checkout. Okay? We selected some product, we want to buy it. If we can't buy it for some reason, then the company loses money, and it's real money. It's more complex in, you know, in corporate applications because there is no direct correlation between money and user actions. But still, in every application, there are critical paths. So first, define scenarios which are on your critical path. And second, define scenarios which might cause to domino effect. What I mean domino effect? The best, I think, example is reporting. Reporting is many times a big performance killer because, especially in applications where there is a big data. In you know, big data applications, there are some reports which just absolutely killing the system. You know, they bring so much data, they process so much data that many times in this time, like, the system is overloaded. And sometimes it happens with single report, like single user generates a report and your system is like almost down. And this is what I call domino effect. Why? Because most times reporting is not on our critical path. You know, reporting is something it's nice to have in terms of users. You know, they don't do it on every day. They generate it once in a while. It's usually not a critical part of your system, but in terms of impact, it might be very critical because you might impact everybody else on the system. And this is what I call domino effect. So this is two kind of criteria to choose what I think to choose the right scenarios. So if you drive by it, you will find yourself somewhere between 5 to 10 business scenarios for almost every system, which are really critical, which really matters. I think, you know, it obviously depends on system, but I think if you have more than 10 scenarios in your load test, you know, then you need to rethink it, at least for a given task, okay? Because load testing hundreds of scenarios is really tough. It's really difficult to identify performance problem when you have so much application areas impacted, because it's very difficult to correlate then where the problem might be, okay? So less scenarios we have, it's easier for us to correlate things, okay? Like I said, you know, if we test, say, report generation and logging scenario, right, and we see the system is slow, we have, say, just 2 scenarios and we can easily eliminate it. We can understand if performance is impacted by report generation or performance is impacted by logging scenario. And logging scenario, by the way, it sounds like, you know, it's the simplest scenario, you know, what can happen when user logs in. But surprisingly, it's one of weakest, in many systems, it's one of weakest points, because of, in many systems, there are many audit activities which are related to login. When we logged in, the system writes down a lot of data just to audit us. And many times, the way this data is written is quite painful for performance. But anyway, what I'm saying, you know, less scenarios you have, it's easier for you to correlate and you know, to kind of find where the problem is. A little bit about load testing types. You know, again, it's something which debatable, but I just you know, try to bring the main types of load testing. So the basic is workload. Workload is all about simulating our normal load conditions on application. So the average day, right? So let's say we are a consumer system, we have kind of peak hours, we have normal hours, right? And we have like quiet hours, yeah, like at night. So workload is all about simulating the normal hours. So it's not a night, like, you know, not a downtime where people are not working, but also not a peak hours, okay? So the first is we start with workload testing. So we not try to just push the system to its limit at the beginning, because first we want to uncover the common performance problems. You know, load testing is like plumbing, right? So, you know, you have a pipe and, you know, it's stuck or, you know, it's blocked in different places, right? So when you let the water go through, you need first to resolve the first bottleneck, you know, to identify the next one. So it's the same is here, okay? So we don't try just to crash the system at the beginning, because then we might miss the problems which, you know, which will not crash the system but impact the performance. So we start with workload, then we go to the stress testing. Stress testing is, you know, some say that it's your peak hours, some say it's your peak hours doubled, okay, or, you know, 1.5 and so on. Anyways, the idea in stress testing is make sure your application can keep up with the, you know, with the peaks, okay? And, you know, you can go with the peaks, you can go with your peak extra, but anyway, you need to know your usage patterns to do that, okay? Another thing is stability testing. Stability testing is simple. We just run usually a workload, not a peak, not a stress test, a workload for just long period of time. So long period of time can be anything between few hours to few days, up to you. But the idea is to figure out kind of, you know, memory leakage and instability which is related with things which happen over time. Capacity testing is when we want to see what our system is capable to do. And many times people confuse stress testing and capacity, because we can say, listen, we stress test the system, so we kind of find it limits. But the thing is, when we stress the system, we don't necessarily find the limit which we want to say this is a capacity. Because, you know, our capacity doesn't necessarily mean that after, you know, let's say our system supports 100 users, it doesn't mean that on 101 user it will crash. So capacity is not necessarily about crashing. It might be about business goals. So for example, we might define that our system capacity must meet 2 seconds response time. You know, we might define this goal. And if it's 3 seconds, it's still not like our system's crashing. But we want to set the capacity on certain goals, okay, and see what our current hardware setup can support. But supporting something is based on goals, not just based on just a gut feeling on, say, you know, if system crashes, then this is the end. And the scale testing, it's all about what if, you know. So we have a current setup of our system. Scale testing all about trying to predict you know, if we need to scale, so we have a certain capacity, say 100 users. In scale testing, we're trying to predict what if we need to support tomorrow 200 users. What will be impact on our mostly infrastructure? You know, how many servers, just saying it simply, how many servers we need to add to our setup to support, let's say, double capacity we have today. A little bit load testing tools, you know, if I will have to list all tools, I will probably need like few good slides. So just a few tools which I wanted to, you know, bring to your attention. JMeter, I think one of most popular tools. Open source, you know, it's for ages there. I mean, nice tool. Problem with JMeter is mostly reporting. It's not, you know, doesn't have very sophisticated reports. Even so, you have plugins, and you know, you can extend it. Another problem is it's with the scale. So, you know, if you need to run really large tests, so you need some, you know, you need to do some work to make it happen. Another tool, interesting tool, which is actually done by Blazemeter is Tarus. Tarus is a load testing tool based on YML. YML is like JSON. So basically, you define your load test in JSON. And it's very simple, and it's very, I think, in mindset, it's very like business-oriented, right? So it's kind of trying to be a bit less technical. So I do recommend to look at it. Gatling is really a new star, you know, getting very popular. Very nice, simple tool with nice reporting. Blazemeter is actually not a tool, but Blazemeter is actually a platform. Blazemeter allows you to run JMeter tests or Taurus tests on scale. So say you want to run tomorrow 100,000 user tests. So you're probably not going to put, you know, hundreds and hundreds of machines by yourself. Okay, so you can go to Blazemeter, and there's numerous competitors. So Blazemeter as an example, I do like the tool. I think it's really doing a good job. It's not the cheapest one, but the idea is if you want to run like a large load, then Blazemeter really, or similar tools are really answer. And the last to mention, but not the least, is a StormRunner. StormRunner is basically based on LoadRunner, one of oldest tools in the market. While you know, LoadRunner, as I said, LoadRunner is a bit old-fashioned, and so they try to renovate. I think StormRunner has some really, really great features. I mean, if you really want to go deep on performance testing, they also provide the infrastructure, but I think also the analytical side is great. And if you use other HP tools, you know, like ALM and so on, so it's nicely integrated with them. So good stuff, especially, you know, for DevOps. If you use like HP products, it's very nice. You can build a very nice, like, you know, flow. In terms of future, what I think the future of load testing. So first of all, we are going to see more real user-driven tools. Okay. What I mean is, you know, most of our systems, they're already there in production. So it's not new systems. In production, we have real users which are using our system, and we can gather a lot of both data and preparational stuff for our load testing. So what I envision is that at some point we will just, instead of creating load tests the way we do it, like recording and, you know, entering our scenarios, we will just gather it from production. I mean, wouldn't it be cool if we can have load testing scripts automatically created from production usage? Because then we have everything. We have usage patterns there, we have a real scenarios, and we can gather what's important. As I said, identifying the scenarios. So I think there are already a number of tools who are trying to do it. So I think this is a direction. Definitely AI-driven, also connected to real user. Like, you know, trying to do as much thing as possible by, you know, robots and like computers instead of today we do a lot of work manually in load testing. It's very time-consuming stuff. Containers is, you know, very interesting for performance in both aspects. First, because you can easily create your load environment. So, you know, if you want to test it, say, with JMeter, it's much easier to create new servers and, you know, to scale. And also in terms of test environment, like application you want to test, it's much easier with containers to simulate as much possible and similar application to your production. And also shift left, I think, causing load testing to be more common among both developers on the other side, which weren't doing really load tests so far, and on other side, manual testers. So, load testing is kind of in between. So there are usually very few people or organizations who deal with performance load testing, and I think it's going to spread more toward developers and more toward functional testers. Let's talk a little bit about performance and not load. So performance basically consists of two parts, client-side and server-side. So client-side performance, it's all about what client feels in ideally in single user scenario, right? What his experience. And if we talk about websites performance, yeah, so there are a number of parameters which we can gather on website performance. It's called, you can then, I believe you will get the presentation, you can read more about it. It's called performance timing. So browser basically collects for you quite a lot of client-side statistics, and it gives you quite a good insight how your user experience is going to be. So one of the things in user experience is when me as a user in web application can interact with a page. So it means that page is not necessarily yet completely loaded, but I can already do some actions with it. And this is actually a very important time because it means that then I can get engaged. Before this, I'm just sitting and waiting, okay? So there are a number of parameters you can read about performance timing. I think really useful if you test performance, not necessarily load, but actually purely performance testing. In mobile world, there are some additional aspects. So obviously response time is important. What starts to be very important, pay attention, is animations. Many applications today are animated, and animations are not always smooth. And this is part of user experience and part of performance. So we need to be aware of it and make sure the animations got right on different devices. Battery drain is also one of the biggest problems. Still, even so, we are like, almost 10 years from the moment, iPhone was introduced and all the market got mad about smartphones. Still, batteries is the biggest problem, I think, for most of us. So you need to be aware how much battery your application is using. And I do include it in performance, okay? So it's not necessarily about time, but it's still about performance. Be aware of sensor performance. Today we live in IoT world. A lot of gadgets. We have smartphones. We have different devices on us. Which are connected to our phone. And the connectivity and sensors are not always working smooth. And sometimes it's all about performance. Sometimes functional problem, but sometimes it's all about performance. So we need to test this aspect as well. And of course, network. On paper we have 4G, but this 4G is, from my feeling, is not necessarily much faster than 3G. So the network performance is still quite an issue, especially in different areas. So you need to also test your application in different network conditions. So you need to simulate it. Server-side performance. So there are also a number of aspects on server-side performance which we need to be aware of, both in load testing and in purely performance testing. So, we need to be aware of DNS resolve time, connection time, send time, time to first byte. Time to first byte, for example, is a very important measurement. Time to first byte tells us when we start to get response from the server, okay? And it's kind of indicator for server performance because DNS might be anything. It's not necessary because of, our application. The connection time might be impacted also, not necessarily because of our application, but because of setup, the way where client is, and so on. Okay? But time to first byte, usually, it's obviously have a network overhead, but it's usually impacted directly by our application. So it's important measurement to see where our application proceeded our request and start to respond. One of really nice things for performance testing is performance waterfall. So you can record your traffic. Or you can open even F12, like in every browser you have development tools, in Internet Explorer, in Chrome and so on. And then you can, reload your page and see something like this. In different browsers it's called timing, performance and all this, but basically what it shows you here, it shows you distribution of requests over time. I don't know if you see, no, you don't see my marker. So you see kind of, the X, the horizontal part is your time, okay? So, and here you can see your requests, and you can see actually what stacks your page. For example, if you have a Facebook plugin, And sometimes, or some third parties like Google Analytics, sometimes this thing impact your performance. Even so, your application performance is great. So you need to be aware of it. A bit about tools, again, there are many tools. So my idea in this slide is not to give you all possible tools or cover all possible aspects, but there are a few tools which I saw it's worth mentioning. So the basic performance testing tool for web is webpagetest.org. Really nice tool. What it does, you give it a URL, any URL, okay? And you say from where you want to access it. It has tens of locations worldwide. And what it does, it simulates, it opens a real browser in this location and brings you a page, and it gives you some kind of waterfall and many other statistics. So it really allows you to see your client-side performance, both from purely client-side aspect, but also from location aspect. So you can see if your performance is different from China than from San Francisco and on. One more tool worth mentioning is a New Relic. Really nice tool, especially for server-side performance. And one more is AppPulse. AppPulse is, today it's not HP anymore, it's Micro Focus. But for mobile performance, like if we want to see how our mobile performance is doing in production, great tool. Really can give you user experience, bottlenecks, crashes, and everything. A word about DevOps. So in terms of where we want to test performance and load in DevOps process. So basically, again, up until now, most of work was done in pre-production environment. But I do strongly recommend to start much earlier, especially if we use like Jenkins and CI tools. So run your load tests, and even you can run your performance single user test right after you run your automation functional test. I think this is really one of best places to do. I mean, we can claim, say, let's run it in unit testing for developers, but I don't see how it happens, really. I do see how it happens together with a regression or sanity package. Now, automation tests can give you great performance metrics if you do it right. So you don't necessarily need to build a load test separately. You can utilize your existing automation test and just add performance aspects. So you can record, proxy, you can add proxy server and record server-side performance. So there are many things you can do on the way with minimal effort. And then you can get a great regression on performance as well, even before you run a load test. And in terms of succeeding in DevOps, because DevOps it's all about automation and integration, so first you need to make sure, because load testing is done mostly on API level, like on server-side level, you need to make sure you know the changes, because otherwise your load test will never work. If you deploy every night and you don't have some process updating your load test, then it's never going to happen in CI process. One more thing which I said is make clear KPIs. Make sure your definition right. When we run DevOps process, we want a clear answer, it's passed or failed. There is no like maybe, it's very black and white. So we need to define clear KPIs to make sure we can give the right answer. Code profiling is very powerful, so if you use tools like New Relic or other tools, it can give you a great insight in addition to just performance and load statistics. Test environment monitoring, also very important, especially in CI, so you can get much more clever answers. And reporting. Make sure your report doesn't include just response time, but it includes an integration of all aspects like logs, like server performance, monitor aspects, and profiling. If you have these reports, then your CI will really be beneficial for performance aspects. You will react them fast. Thank you very much, guys. Questions? Yeah. One moment, I think he was first. Just a second.
Hi. Could you please recommend any tools for performance measuring for desktop?
Performance for desktop? Wow, that's a tough question. Well, I think in desktop world, mostly you need to define your measurements. So you can use tools like, even you can use tools like Mixpanel, which is usually used for marketing, measuring user activities. You can use these tools for performance as well. But in desktop, because, there are no like proper events like, page load time and stuff like this, so I think you need to create your own measurements, and you can use like regular BI tools to report it. Okay? There are a number of, I don't remember the name, but there are a number of applications which do it, kind of try to do it automatically. I think the best for desktop is, you know best what's your performance aspects on desktop, especially because desktop not always interacts with the server. In desktop applications, many times it's all about, just functionality which is local. So you need to know what's your performance measurements. Okay, so if you want to measure the speed it renders your screen, or it opens a dialog and so on, and I think it's very difficult for a regular tool to kind of identify it. But I do think you can use tools like Mixpanel and others just to put measurements there, So you define the measurements, you send them to the systems, and then they give you a trends. Because performance, it's mostly about trends. It's not about just a single transaction, a single click. It's mostly to see, where I am when I do it many, many times over and over again. If you like, there is my email. Drop me a line. I will send you the tool which one of my clients use, which doing it automatically. Okay? I don't remember now the name. You wanted to ask a question? Yeah. Here. One moment. He was first. You will. Yeah. Right. 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 I understand the question. So the answer for first question is, yeah, sorry. The question was, there were two questions, right? I think the first question was that we didn't really speak about resource utilization, right? We spoke about performance, about timing mostly, and something, but we didn't speak about, performance also about, like, how much CPU your different processes take, how much memory, and so on. So my answer to this question is, obviously, performance testing, load testing is also about resources. The reason why I recommended New Relic or also Dynatrace is a great tool is because these tools do it for you on pretty good level. Okay, so you can always do it, semi-manually. So if it's Windows server, you can always open Performance Monitor and start to recording the performance aspects. Or many load testing tools can integrate with your service and put everything on one chart. But I think profiling tools, on top of just profiling code, I think they're also doing a great job with just monitoring the resources and putting everything on one chart. Because you want to see it kind of all correlated. So you want to see, let's say, spike in your response time, and then you want to see at the same chart, you want to see why it happened. So say if it's a resources problem, you want to see that one of your servers, say the CPU went up, or memory, or I/O. Yeah? So, many profiling tools like Dynatrace and like New Relic, they give you everything in one chart, and it's very convenient, right? What was the second question, sorry? Bottlenecks. Again, I think New Relic and tools like Dynatrace, like, I, for example, because I wrote a lot of, web systems, many times I myself can guess where the bottleneck is. Because I know for different technologies and for different types of systems where usually developers are lazy, when they don't do, a good job. On the other side, if you don't have such a, experience or you're not coming from development background, then these tools are great for you because they do it for you, especially Dynatrace. Dynatrace, I think, is an amazing tool. It's a very expensive tool, but it's an amazing tool because it allows you to trace everything from user experience, like in browser, till to even database calls. Like you can even trace, SQL queries. And it absolutely in a great way gives you where the problem is. Almost like, just here's the problem, okay? So I think just, use these tools and, it's the easiest way to do, yeah.
Hello, what about mobile load testing approach and...
You are right, I promised you, sorry.
Yeah.
Mobile load testing. See, one of challenges in mobile load testing is how we record the traffic. So there are a number of challenges, right? But in mobile load testing, one of challenges is how we record the traffic, right? Because in browser, it's easy. In browser, most tools just change the proxy settings automatically and we record it. If we have our app on mobile device, and how we do it? So one of simplest things I saw is, again, BlazeMeter. They have just a proxy recorder which is built for mobile devices. So all what you do, you go to their website, you write in Google BlazeMeter proxy recorder, and you go to their website, and you just, it's like 3 lines, 3 bullet points instructions, and you can do the recording part. Then you can generate it in JMeter. Now, what many people confuse is performance and load testing on mobile. Because load testing on mobile devices, they should completely ignore the device itself. Because load testing is not about device, it's about servers, right? Because it's multi-user. So if our server is slow, then everybody is impacted. If my device is slow, only I impacted, right? So load testing is not about testing the device as a hardware, but testing your server from perspective of device interacting with it, right? On the other side, on performance, the performance testing of mobile devices, I covered it in my slide. There are numbers of tools how you can see resources utilization, how you can see your crashes on all this. Some tools are free. They are coming built in, like, for example, instruments for Apple. Yeah, so you have a great tool set for free as a part of Xcode, or some command line tools with Android, and some like app pools that are commercial. But it's up to you. I mean, if your organization want to put some budget, I think commercial tools usually give you the easiest, the easiest way to do it and with less time effort. If you want to, a bit more tough route, then you can always use a built-in tools. But today, every company which produce mobile devices, they usually have or their or Google/Apple performance testing tools.
Hello. Just wondering, is there any tools which can natively allow us to gather not only some native load and performance metrics like response per second, throughput, and other things, but also gather some server hardware metrics which is currently under testing, like CPU frequency, hard drives, load, memory, and free memory and other things.
In web or mobile world?
In web.
In web world. Well, in web mode, there are classical monitoring tools. There are plenty of them, from Nachum, yeah, like it's free open source, to tools, to commercial tools like HP has them, IBM, everybody has them, right? So gathering purely CPU, memory, and server-side statistics, I think it's easy. It's out there for tens, many years. I think what's challenging today is to correlate these statistics with your client-side or / applicational performance. Because you need to put it in proper context. If you just monitor your server, CPU, and you see the spike, you don't know why the spike happened. You don't have a context. Okay? So if it's constantly on 100%, then there is a problem, you can react. But if you have spikes, it's very difficult to understand why you have them. So you need to put it in proper context. So I think the tools, again, like New Relic, like Dynatrace, this is a new generation of tools which bring you the context. So they do monitor it, but they also bring you a context. Yeah?
Okay, thank you.
Hi. The question is about your section the future. You told us about real user driven testing.
Yeah.
Can you tell a little bit more about it? Maybe you have some experience, some examples.
About what, sorry?
About real user driven testing.
Well, I think the best example is tools like app pools, right? you know, AppPulse allows you to really monitor performance aspects deeply of your mobile users, and there are similar tools in the web. Yeah, so, but you can really learn a lot from this. For example, you know, one of the problems that I mentioned is that many times in load and performance testing, you don't know your usage pattern. You don't know your goals, right? So you're blind. You start to test, but you don't really know what you expect. So real user, if you gather data and if you build a smart mechanism behind real user usage, then you can get all this information. It's out there, you know. And just many times the marketing people and product people, they can't extract it. And surprisingly, us as a technical people, we can, okay? So, I think for practically now, the user-driven testing is mostly what we call real user monitoring. So it's still kind of monitoring purposes, but I do envision that it will go beyond it and it will be a proactive testing part. Okay, so it's not there yet, but I do think it natively will go towards this direction. Yeah.
Nick, thank you very much for your speech.
Thank you very much.